Elise Ward's hands moved with practiced precision as she stripped down the Barrett M82, but when her small cleaning kit opened, a polished metal tumbled out onto the workbench. The corporal's face went white as he read the inscription, 305 confirmed eliminations. This wasn't just any armory technician cleaning rifles, this was something else entirely, and the quiet woman who never spoke about her past was about to reveal why some medals are never meant to be seen. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the armory basement of Fort Henderson, casting harsh shadows across rows of weapon racks that stretched from floor to ceiling like metallic skeletons. Elise Ward sat hunched over her workbench in the far corner, surrounded by the familiar symphony of clicking metal, sliding bolts, and the occasional curse from other technicians wrestling with stubborn mechanisms. At 34, she had the kind of unremarkable appearance that made people forget they had met her within minutes of walking away. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and hands that moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who preferred tools to conversation. Corporal Jake Martinez approached her station with heavy footsteps, dragging behind him a rifle case that looked like it had seen better decades. The Barrett M82 inside was a beast of a weapon, a .50 caliber anti-material rifle capable of stopping vehicles and punching through concrete walls. Martinez dropped the case beside Elise's bench with a metallic thud that made several nearby technicians look up from their work. "Ward, I need this cleaned and serviced by 1500 hours, Martinez said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool underground air. "Bolts jammed tighter than a bank vault, and the trigger mechanism is giving us grief. Command wants it ready for tomorrow's range qualification." Elise looked up from the M4 carbine she had been reassembling, her gray eyes taking in the battered rifle case without any visible emotion. She had been working in the armory for 3 years, ever since her transfer from what her personnel file vaguely described as overseas operations. Most people assumed she had been a supply clerk or administrative assistant who wanted a change of scenery. The assumption suited her perfectly. "No problem, Corporal," she replied in the soft voice that barely carried beyond her workstation. "Should have it running smooth by noon." Martinez nodded and headed back toward the stairwell, already moving on to the next item on his endless daily checklist. The moment his boots disappeared up the concrete steps, Elise opened the rifle case with movements that seemed almost reverent. The Barrett lay nestled in custom foam padding, its massive frame designed for one purpose, reaching out across impossible distances to touch targets that others couldn't even see. She lifted the rifle with both hands, feeling the familiar weight distribution that spoke to muscle memory buried deep in places she tried not to visit during daylight hours. The weapon was indeed jammed, its bolt frozen halfway between closed and open positions. Elise carried it to her workbench and began the process of field stripping the rifle with movements that flowed like water. Her hands found the receiver pins without looking, fingers dancing across surfaces that most armory techs would approach with manual in hand. She had torn down Barrett rifles in complete darkness, in sandstorms that could strip paint from metal, and in conditions where a single mistake meant the difference between mission success and body bags. The muscle memory was burned into her nervous system like scar tissue that would never fully heal. As she worked, Elise felt the familiar meditation that came with mechanical precision. Each component had its place, its purpose, its relationship to every other part in the system. She could lose herself in the rhythm of disassembly and cleaning, letting her conscious mind drift while her hands performed tasks that required no thought. It was safer this way, keeping busy with immediate problems that had clear solutions. The jam turned out to be caused by a combination of factors. Carbon buildup around the gas system, a slightly bent extractor claw, and what appeared to be desert sand that had somehow found its way into the receiver despite the weapon supposedly never leaving the continental United States. Elise raised an eyebrow at that detail but said nothing. Military records were often creative works of fiction, especially when it came to weapons that had seen action in places that officially didn't exist. She moved to her cleaning station and began the methodical process of removing years of accumulated grime and wear. The Barrett responded to her attention like a neglected instrument being tuned by a master musician. Each part received individual attention, every surface examined for wear patterns that might indicate future problems. Elise had learned long ago that weapon maintenance was about predicting failures before they happened, not just fixing problems after they appeared. While working, she became aware that the armory had gradually grown quieter. The other technicians had finished their morning assignments and moved on to other tasks, leaving her alone with the mechanical sounds of her own work. The solitude suited her perfectly. She'd always been more comfortable with machines than people, finding honesty in the way metal responded to proper treatment and care. As she reassembled the rifle's trigger group, Elise reached for her small cleaning kit, a compact leather case that contained specialized tools she had accumulated over years of working on precision weapons. The kit had traveled with her through multiple duty stations, its contents carefully curated for maximum versatility. She thumbed open the brass clasps and lifted the lid. A polished metal tumbled out onto the workbench with a soft metallic chime. Elise froze, her hands hovering over the kit, as if she had just uncovered a coiled snake. The metal lay face up on the steel surface, its silver finish reflecting the harsh fluorescent lighting. It was roughly the size of a silver dollar, with intricate engravings around the border that marked it as something official, something important. But it was the inscription in the center that made her stomach clench like a fist. 305 confirmed eliminations. The words were etched in precise military font, each letter cut deep enough to remain readable after years of handling. Below the number was a small symbol that most people would never recognize, a crosshair with a single star at its center. It was the mark of the Shadow Division, a unit that existed in budget line items and nowhere else, whose operations were buried so deep in classified files that most government officials didn't know they existed. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Elise's training kicked in automatically, her hand moving to cover the metal while her eyes tracked toward the sound. Corporal Martinez was returning, probably to check on her progress, or to bring another weapon that needed attention. She had perhaps 10 seconds before he would be close enough to see her workstation clearly. Her fingers closed around the metal, feeling the weight of it, the warmth of metal that had been handled countless times. For a moment, she was transported back to a time when such tokens had meaning, when the numbers they represented were achievements rather than burdens. The medal had been presented to her in a ceremony that never officially happened, in recognition of service that would never appear in any public record. Martinez appeared at the top of the stairs, his boots clicking against concrete as he descended into the armory. Elise slipped the medal back into her cleaning kit with movements that appeared casual, but were executed with the precision of someone who had spent years keeping secrets. By the time the corporal reached her workstation, she was back to work on the Barrett's receiver, her face showing nothing more than professional concentration. "How's it coming along, Ward?" Martinez asked, leaning against the edge of her workbench. "That jam giving you any trouble?" "Just carbon buildup and some sand," Elise replied, without looking up from her work. "Someone's been taking this rifle, places it's not supposed to go, but it should be ready for qualification tomorrow." Martinez frowned at that assessment. According to the paperwork he had seen, the Barrett had never left the base armory except for scheduled training exercises on the local range. But Elise had a reputation for finding problems that other technicians missed, and her work was always flawless. If she said there was desert sand in the mechanism, then there was desert sand in the mechanism, regardless of what the official records claimed. "Any idea how long it might have been since this weapon saw proper maintenance?" Martinez asked, fishing for information without directly questioning the official story. Elise paused in her cleaning to examine the barrel extension more closely. Wear patterns told stories to those who knew how to read them, and this barrel had stories written in carbon scoring and metal fatigue that spoke of extensive use under harsh conditions. She could see the evidence of hundreds of rounds fired in rapid succession, the kind of sustained firing that only happened in combat situations. "Hard to say exactly," she replied carefully, "but based on the wear patterns, I guess it's been at least 6 months since anyone gave it a thorough cleaning. Maybe longer." Martinez nodded, accepting her assessment without further question. Elise had never steered him wrong before, and he had learned to trust her judgment when it came to weapon condition. Still, something about the situation bothered him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. The rifle had supposedly been in storage for the past year, waiting for its turn in the maintenance rotation. How did a stored weapon accumulate the kind of wear and debris that Elise was describing? Well, just get it ready for tomorrow, Martinez said finally. The brass wants a full demonstration of the Barrett's capabilities for some visiting dignitaries, and everything needs to be perfect. After Martinez left, Elise continued working in silence, but her mind was no longer focused entirely on the mechanical task before her. The appearance of the metal had cracked open doors in her memory that she had spent 3 years learning to keep closed. Each component she cleaned brought back fragments of a life she had walked away from, a world where precision was measured in heartbeats and distances were calculated in minutes of flight time. She remembered the first time she had held a Barrett M82 in combat conditions, the weight of it different somehow, when lives hung in the balance. The rifle had been her constant companion through 18 months of operations that officially never happened, in countries that didn't appear on any mission reports. She had learned to read wind patterns like a native language, to calculate bullet drop across distances that pushed the boundaries of what human skill and mechanical precision could achieve together. The metal in her cleaning kit represented the culmination of that period, a recognition that she had become something rare and valuable in the world of special operations. 305 confirmed eliminations meant 305 threats neutralized, 305 missions completed, 305 reasons why her teammates had come home alive. It also meant 305 faces that visited her dreams, regardless of how justified each shot had been. Elise finished cleaning the barrel and moved on to the rifle's scope mounts, checking for any signs of looseness or damage that might affect accuracy. Her hands moved automatically through the inspection process, while her mind drifted back to the circumstances that had led to her transfer out of active operations. There had been no dramatic incident, no failure or court-martial that forced her out. Instead, she had simply reached a point where the weight of accumulated success had become heavier than she could carry. The psychological evaluations had been thorough but inconclusive. She showed no signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, no indication of the emotional breakdown that sometimes claimed long-range specialists after extended deployment. Instead, her evaluators had found something more troubling, a complete emotional detachment from the act of taking human life, a clinical precision that seemed to have replaced normal human responses to violence. They had offered her medical retirement, disability benefits, and access to counseling programs that might help her process what she had experienced. Elise had turned down all of it, requesting instead a transfer to a position where she could continue serving without being asked to kill. The armory assignment had seemed perfect. She could use her technical knowledge to keep weapons in peak condition while avoiding the moral complexities of their ultimate purpose. For 3 years, the arrangement had worked perfectly. She had become invisible in the way that support personnel often did, essential but unnoticed, competent but unremarkable. Her personnel file listed her previous experience as logistics support, and no one had ever thought to question what kind of logistics required such intimate knowledge of precision rifle systems. She had found peace in the routine of maintenance and repair, satisfaction in problems that could be solved with the right tools and sufficient patience. But the appearance of the metal changed everything. It was a reminder that some parts of her past would never stay buried, no matter how carefully she tried to construct a new identity. The metal represented not just her service record, but the person she had been, the skills she had developed, and the reputation that followed her, despite her efforts to disappear into anonymity. As she reassembled the Barrett's trigger mechanism, Elise considered the implications of Martinez finding the metal. Her cover story was solid enough to withstand casual scrutiny, but the kind of attention that such a discovery would bring might uncover details that were meant to stay classified. The Shadow Division protected its secrets jealously, and former operatives who attracted unwanted attention sometimes found their situations becoming complicated in ways that transcended normal military bureaucracy. She paused in her work to examine the metal more closely, studying the engraving with eyes that had learned to notice details others missed. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each line and curve executed with precision that spoke of custom manufacture rather than mass production. This wasn't a standard military decoration, but something created specifically for recognition within a community that existed outside normal chains of command and official acknowledgement. The number 305 represented more than just successful missions. It was a testament to a level of skill that few people in the world could claim. Long-range elimination required a combination of technical knowledge, physical ability, and psychological resilience that eliminated most candidates before they ever fired a shot in anger. Those who succeeded became part of an informal brotherhood that transcended national boundaries and military hierarchies. Elise remembered the weight of expectation that had come with her reputation, the way mission planners had begun automatically assigning her the most difficult targets, the ones that others couldn't or wouldn't take. She'd become a specialist in impossible shots, the sniper who got called when conventional approaches had failed. The medal represented the recognition of her peers, people who understood exactly what those numbers meant and what they had cost her to achieve. But it also represented everything she had walked away from. The isolation of operating alone for days or weeks at a time. The moral complexity of making life and death decisions based on intelligence that might be incomplete or inaccurate. The gradual erosion of normal human connections as the requirements of operational security made genuine relationships impossible. She had traded those burdens for the simple satisfaction of maintaining equipment, and until today, she had never questioned whether the trade was worth it. The Barrett was nearly ready for final function testing, when Elise heard footsteps approaching her workstation again. This time, it wasn't Martinez, but Staff Sergeant Rebecca Hayes, the Armory's senior non-commissioned officer, and someone who had always shown more interest in Elise's background than was entirely comfortable. Hayes had 22 years of military experience across multiple specialties, and she possessed the kind of institutional knowledge that came from observing patterns over decades of service. "Afternoon, Ward," Hayes said, settling into a chair beside Elise's workbench. "Martinez tells me you found some interesting wear patterns on that Barrett." Elise continued working on the rifle's final assembly, not trusting herself to meet Hayes's eyes directly. The staff sergeant had a talent for reading people that made conversations with her feel like interrogations, even when they were supposed to be casual. "Nothing too unusual, Sergeant. Just signs that someone's been putting it through its paces harder than the paperwork suggests." Hayes picked up one of the cleaned components from Elise's workbench, a bolt carrier that gleamed under the fluorescent lighting. Her examination was thorough and knowledgeable, the kind of inspection that came from years of working with precision weapons. "You know, Ward, I've been in this business long enough to recognize certain types of wear patterns. This bolt carrier has seen the kind of sustained firing that only happens in very specific circumstances." The observation hung in the air between them like a question that hadn't been directly asked. Elise knew that Hayes was fishing for information, but she wasn't sure whether the staff sergeant suspected something about the rifle's history or about her own background. Either possibility was dangerous in ways that could cascade beyond simple curiosity. "Combat weapons tend to show different wear than training rifles," Elise replied carefully. "Maybe this one saw action overseas before it ended up here." Hayes set the bolt carrier back on the workbench with deliberate precision, her eyes never leaving Elise's face. "That's possible, I suppose. Though according to the paperwork, this particular rifle has never left the continental United States. Makes me wonder how it picked up all that desert sand you mentioned to Martinez." Elise felt a cold weight settling in her stomach as she realized that Hayes's interest went beyond casual curiosity. The staff sergeant was building towards something, accumulating details that might eventually add up to conclusions that Elise couldn't afford to have drawn. She finished installing the Barrett's trigger group and began the process of final function testing, using the mechanical routine to buy time while she considered her options. "Records aren't always complete, Sergeant," she said finally. "Weapons get transferred, loaned out, used for purposes that don't always make it into the official documentation." Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Elise with the kind of patient attention that suggested she had all day to pursue the conversation. "True enough. But you know what really interests me, Ward? It's your level of familiarity with this particular weapon system. Most armory techs would need to consult technical manuals to properly service a Barrett. You've been working on it like you've done it 1,000 times before." The observation was accurate and dangerous. Elise had indeed serviced Barrett rifles hundreds of times, but that experience was supposed to be invisible, buried beneath a cover story that portrayed her as a logistics specialist with general weapon maintenance training. Hayes's comment suggested that her competence had become conspicuous in ways she hadn't anticipated. "I've always been interested in learning about different weapon systems," Elise replied, testing the rifle's bolt action with smooth, practiced movements. "The Barrett's a fascinating piece of engineering." Hayes smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Fascinating indeed, especially when you consider its primary purpose. This isn't a weapon designed for general infantry use, Ward. It's a specialized tool for very specific applications, most of which require extensive training to master." Elise completed her function testing and began cleaning her workbench, organizing tools with the methodical precision that had become second nature over years of military service. She could feel Hayes watching her every movement, cataloging details that might eventually form a pattern. The conversation was moving in directions that threatened to expose secrets that were meant to stay buried. "All weapons have their purpose, Sergeant," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "My job is just to make sure they function properly when called upon." Hayes stood up from her chair, brushing imaginary dust from her uniform. "Of course, but some weapons have more specialized purposes than others. Take this Barrett, for example. In the right hands, it's capable of engaging targets at ranges that would challenge even experienced marksmen. Requires someone with very specific training and experience to use effectively." End quote. The implications of Hayes's words were becoming impossible to ignore. The staff sergeant was all but stating her suspicion that Elise's background included experience with precision rifle systems that went far beyond basic armory maintenance. Whether she was fishing for information or already possessed knowledge that she was testing, the situation was developing in ways that required careful handling. Elise closed her cleaning kit, making sure the metal was securely positioned where it wouldn't accidentally fall out again. The metal clasps clicked shut with finality that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet armory. She looked up to meet Hayes's gaze directly for the first time in the conversation. "The Barrett's ready for tomorrow's demonstration, Sergeant," she said with calm professionalism. "Full function testing complete. Accuracy should be well within specifications." Hayes nodded slowly, accepting the change of subject while making it clear that she considered the conversation far from finished. "Excellent work, Ward. As always, your attention to detail is exactly what we need in this department." After Hayes left, Elise remained at her workbench, staring at the perfectly maintained Barrett M82 that sat before her like a monument to skills she was trying to forget. The rifle represented the intersection of her past and present, a piece of equipment that bridged the gap between the person she had been and the person she was trying to become. Its presence in the armory was a reminder that complete escape from one's history was rarely possible, especially when that history involved capabilities that few people possessed. She ran her hand along the rifle's stock, feeling the subtle textures that spoke of countless hours of use. The Barrett was more than just a weapon. It was an extension of the operator's will, a tool that transformed intention into action across distances that defied normal human limitations. In the right hands, it was capable of precision that bordered on the miraculous, able to reach out across miles to touch targets that others couldn't even see. Elise had once been among the handful of people in the world who could unlock the Barrett's full potential. She understood its ballistics, its limitations, its temperamental nature under different environmental conditions. She knew how wind affected bullet trajectory at various ranges, how temperature influenced powder burn rates, how humidity could alter the flight characteristics of a .50 caliber projectile traveling at supersonic velocities. But more than technical knowledge, she possessed the psychological makeup that allowed her to apply that knowledge under the extreme stress of combat operations. She had learned to control her breathing, her heart rate, her muscle tension to achieve the perfect stillness required for shots measured in fractions of inches across distances measured in thousands of feet. It was a skill set that had taken years to develop and would take a lifetime to completely forget. The metal in her cleaning kit was testament to how completely she had mastered those skills. 305 confirmed eliminations represented not just accuracy, but consistency, the ability to perform under pressure across a wide variety of conditions and circumstances. Each number represented a moment when her training, experience, and natural ability had combined to achieve a result that others couldn't match. But those numbers also represented the weight that had eventually driven her away from active operations. 305 human lives ended by her hand, regardless of how justified each action had been within the context of military objectives. 305 moments when she had made the conscious decision to end another person's existence, knowing that each pull of the trigger was irreversible and absolute. The psychological burden of such responsibility was something that military training could prepare someone for but never fully eliminate. Each successful mission had added to her reputation, while also adding to the emotional weight she carried. Eventually, the accumulated stress of making life-and-death decisions had reached a point where continued service in that capacity became impossible. Her transfer to armory duty had been presented as a lateral move, a chance to use her technical knowledge in a support capacity while stepping back from the direct application of violence. For 3 years, the arrangement had worked perfectly. She had found satisfaction in maintaining equipment rather than using it, in solving mechanical problems rather than tactical ones. The work was honest and straightforward, with clear metrics for success and failure. But the appearance of the medal had shattered that comfortable illusion of separation. It was a reminder that her skills remained intact, that the knowledge and experience she had accumulated didn't simply disappear because she had chosen not to use them. More troubling was the realization that part of her missed the clarity that came with precision rifle work, the pure focus required to achieve shots that pushed the boundaries of what was humanly possible. Elise secured the Barrett in its transport case, checking that all components were properly positioned and protected. Tomorrow's demonstration would showcase the rifle's capabilities to visiting dignitaries who probably had no understanding of what they were witnessing. They would see impressive displays of accuracy and power, without comprehending the years of training and experience required to achieve such results consistently. The demonstration would also put her work on display in ways that made her uncomfortable. Martinez would undoubtedly credit her with the rifle's perfect function, drawing attention to her technical competence in ways that might invite further scrutiny. Hayes's earlier comments suggested that such attention was already becoming problematic, raising questions about her background that she couldn't afford to have answered honestly. As she completed her end-of-day procedures, Elise considered her options for managing the situation. She could request a transfer to another base, but that would require explanations that might draw even more attention to her circumstances. She could maintain her current course and hope that Hayes's suspicions would fade without further development. Or, she could consider the possibility that her attempt to completely separate herself from her past had been naive from the beginning. The truth was that skills like hers didn't simply disappear because someone wanted to live a different life. The Shadow Division had invested considerable resources in her training, and people with her capabilities were rare enough that complete disappearance was probably impossible. Her medal represented not just past achievements, but ongoing potential, a reminder that she remained capable of applications that few others could match. Walking home through the base housing area, Elise reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 5 years ago, she had been one of the most feared and respected long-range specialists in special operations, a person whose name was spoken with reverence in circles that most people would never know existed. Today, she was a quiet armory technician whose greatest achievement was maintaining equipment for others to use. The transition had been voluntary, but also necessary. She had reached a point where continued service in her original capacity would have required her to become someone she didn't want to be, to cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The armory assignment had offered a chance to serve without compromising her remaining sense of moral clarity, to be useful without being destructive. But usefulness took many forms, and Elise was beginning to realize that her current role might not represent the best application of her abilities. The world remained full of threats that required precision solutions, problems that could only be solved by someone with her particular combination of skills and experience. Her medal represented not just past service, but ongoing potential, a reminder that some capabilities were too valuable to waste on routine maintenance tasks. Her small apartment reflected the Spartan lifestyle she had adopted since leaving active operations. Minimal furniture, few personal possessions, nothing that couldn't be packed and moved within a few hours if circumstances required it. The habits of operational security died hard, and she had never fully settled into the assumption that her current life was permanent. The cleaning kit sat on her kitchen table, its brass clasps reflecting the dim light from a single lamp. Inside, the metal waited like a question that demanded an answer. She could continue pretending that her past was buried, that she was just another technician with general maintenance skills. Or, she could acknowledge that some aspects of identity were too fundamental to simply discard when they became inconvenient. Elise opened a kit and removed the metal, holding it up to the light to study the engraving more closely. The number 305 had been etched with precision that matched the standards she had applied to everything else in her military career. Each digit was perfectly formed, cut deep enough to remain legible after years of handling and wear. But it was the crosshair symbol below the number that held her attention most completely. It represented membership in a community that transcended normal military hierarchies, a brotherhood of specialists who understood the unique burdens and responsibilities that came with their particular skill set. It was a symbol that commanded respect among those who understood its meaning and remained invisible to everyone else. The medal had been presented to her in a ceremony that officially never happened, in recognition of service that would never appear in public records. But the recognition it represented was more meaningful than any official decoration because it came from peers who truly understood what the numbers meant. It was acknowledgement from people who had walked similar paths and faced similar choices, who knew the cost of the kind of precision she had achieved. Holding the medal brought back memories of the presentation ceremony, conducted in a secure facility that existed in no official documentation. She remembered the quiet pride she had felt in that moment, the sense that her sacrifices had been recognized and valued by people whose opinions mattered. It had been one of the few times in her career when she had felt truly understood by the institution she served. The medal also represented a promise, both to herself and to those who had trained and supported her. It was a commitment to excellence that extended beyond any single mission or assignment, a pledge to maintain the standards that had made her successful across hundreds of operations. That promise didn't simply disappear because she had chosen to step back from active duty. As she prepared for sleep, Elise found herself thinking about tomorrow's demonstration and the role she would play in ensuring its success. The Barrett would perform flawlessly because she had restored it to perfect mechanical condition, but its ultimate effectiveness would depend on the skill of whoever was selected to fire it. She wondered who would be chosen for that responsibility, and whether they possessed the knowledge and experience necessary to showcase the rifle's true capabilities. The thought bothered her in ways she hadn't expected. She had spent years developing an intimate understanding of the Barrett's characteristics, learning to compensate for its quirks and exploit its strengths. The idea of watching someone else use equipment she had perfected felt strangely personal, like watching a stranger play a musical instrument she had spent years learning to master. But those feelings also revealed something about herself that she had been reluctant to acknowledge. Despite her efforts to find satisfaction in support roles, part of her missed the direct application of her skills. She missed the challenge of making shots that others couldn't make, of solving problems that required her particular combination of knowledge and ability. The armory work was honest and necessary, but it didn't engage the parts of herself that had been most fully developed through years of specialized training. The medal lay on her nightstand, catching occasional gleams of light from the street lamp outside her window. It served as a tangible reminder that some aspects of identity couldn't simply be discarded when they became inconvenient. She had spent 3 years trying to become someone different, but the core competencies that defined her remained intact, regardless of how she chose to apply them. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams that mixed memories of past operations with imagined scenarios involving the Barrett she had repaired. In her dreams, she was back in the field, feeling the familiar weight of precision equipment and the clarity that came with having a specific mission to complete. The dreams weren't nightmares, but they weren't entirely pleasant either, carrying with them the complex emotions that surrounded her previous life. Morning brought the usual routine of coffee and preparation for another day in the armory, but Elise found herself moving with different energy than she had felt in months. The appearance of the medal had awakened something that had been dormant, a sense of purpose that extended beyond routine maintenance tasks. She dressed with more care than usual, checking her appearance in the mirror with attention to details that hadn't seemed important in years. The armory was buzzing with activity when she arrived, technicians preparing equipment for the day's demonstration, while officers moved through the space with the nervous energy that accompanied visits from important civilians. Martinez was coordinating the logistics with his usual competence, but Elise could see the stress in his movements as he tried to ensure that everything would proceed smoothly. "Ward, perfect timing," Martinez called as he spotted her entering the workspace. "I need you to do final checks on the Barrett and then stick around for the demonstration. The brass wants technical support standing by in case there are any questions about the equipment." Elise nodded, accepting the assignment while recognizing that it would put her in closer proximity to the actual firing demonstration than she had expected. She would be able to observe how the rifle performed, and, more importantly, how skillfully it was employed by whoever had been selected as the designated marksman for the event. The Barrett sat in its case exactly as she had left it, perfectly maintained and ready for service. She performed the requested final checks with mechanical precision, verifying that every component was properly seated and secured. The rifle was in better condition than it had been in months, possibly years, and she felt a quiet pride in the quality of her work. But as she completed her inspection, Elise found herself thinking about the demonstration from a different perspective. The visiting dignitaries would witness an impressive display of the Barrett's capabilities, but they wouldn't understand the subtle factors that determined whether those capabilities could be fully realized. Wind conditions, temperature, humidity, and dozens of other variables would influence the rifle's performance in ways that most observers wouldn't recognize. More importantly, the skill level of the designated marksman would ultimately determine how effectively the Barrett's potential was demonstrated. Elise knew from experience that precision rifle work was as much art as science, requiring not just technical knowledge, but instinctive understanding of factors that couldn't be easily quantified. The difference between competent shooting and truly exceptional marksmanship often came down to subtleties that took years to develop. Staff Sergeant Hayes appeared at her workstation, carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone dealing with last-minute complications. "Ward, we've got a problem. The designated marksman for today's demonstration came down with food poisoning overnight. I need to find a replacement who can handle the Barrett competently enough to impress our visitors." Elise felt something shift inside her chest, a stirring of possibilities that she had been suppressing for 3 years. She knew exactly who should be behind the Barrett for the demonstration, who possessed the knowledge and experience necessary to showcase its capabilities most effectively. But acknowledging that knowledge would require her to step out of the shadows she had carefully constructed around her new identity. "What about Sergeant Rodriguez from 2nd Battalion?" she suggested, naming a sniper she knew had some experience with the Barrett system. "He's qualified on the platform and has range records that show consistent accuracy." Hayes shook her head. "Rodriguez is on leave until next week. I'm running out of qualified personnel who are actually available. The demonstration is in 4 hours, and I need someone who can guarantee positive results." Elise continued working on the Barrett's final preparation, but her mind was racing through possibilities and implications. The situation was developing in ways that might require her to make choices she had been avoiding for years. She could maintain her cover and watch someone less qualified potentially struggle with equipment she had perfected, or she could acknowledge her capabilities and volunteer for a role that would expose her true background. "Sergeant, what's your assessment of my technical knowledge regarding the Barrett platform?" she asked carefully, testing the waters without fully committing to any course of action. Hayes stopped writing on her clipboard and looked at Elise with sudden interest. "Your technical knowledge is exceptional, Ward. But technical knowledge and practical marksmanship are different skill sets. Why do you ask?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that both women understood perfectly. Elise was approaching a decision point that would determine whether her carefully constructed cover story remained intact, or whether she would have to acknowledge capabilities that were supposed to remain hidden. "I might have more practical experience with the Barrett than my personnel file suggests," she said finally, the words feeling strange after 3 years of careful concealment. Hayes set down her clipboard and studied Elise with the kind of intense attention that suggested she was re-evaluating everything she thought she knew about the quiet armory technician. "What kind of experience are we talking about, Ward?" Elise looked around the armory, noting which personnel were within earshot, and how much privacy their conversation actually possessed. What she was considering would require explanations that touched on classified operations and career details that were supposed to remain buried. But the alternative was watching inferior marksmanship potentially embarrass the unit during an important demonstration. "The kind of experience that would guarantee your demonstration goes exactly as planned," she replied, meeting Hayes's gaze directly for the first time in years. Hayes nodded slowly, understanding immediately that they were discussing something that extended far beyond routine armory duties. "Ward, I need you to be very clear about what you're suggesting. Are you telling me that you have operational experience with precision rifle systems?" Elise felt the weight of her decision settling around her like a familiar piece of equipment. 3 years of carefully maintained anonymity was about to end with a conversation that would change everything. She reached into her cleaning kit, her fingers finding the metal that had started this entire situation. With deliberate movements, she placed it on the workbench between herself and Hayes. Hayes looked down at the metal, her eyes widening as she read the inscription. 305 confirmed eliminations. The crosshair symbol with its single star. The level of craftsmanship that indicated official recognition from organizations that didn't officially exist. When she looked back up at Elise, her expression had shifted from curiosity to something approaching awe. "Shadow Division," Hayes whispered, recognizing the symbol despite its classified nature. "You're one of the ghosts." Elise nodded once, the simple gesture carrying the weight of acknowledgement that couldn't be taken back. "Was past tense. I've been out of active operations for 3 years. Hayes picked up the metal with reverent care, studying the engraving with the attention of someone who understood its significance. As a 22-year veteran, she had heard whispers about the Shadow Division, rumors about specialists who operated outside normal military structures to handle problems that required extreme precision. Meeting someone who actually possessed credentials from that world was like encountering a legend made flesh. 305 confirmed eliminations, Hayes read aloud, her voice barely audible even in the relative privacy of Elise's workstation. "That's not just operational experience, Ward. That's mastery at a level most people can't even comprehend." Elise took the metal back and returned it to her cleaning kit, the simple action feeling like closing a door that had been forced open. "It's also the reason I transferred out of active duty. Some numbers become too heavy to carry, regardless of how necessary the work was." Hayes understood immediately. She had seen enough combat veterans over the years to recognize the signs of someone who had been pushed to their psychological limits by the demands of their specialty. The fact that Elise had achieved such a record and then voluntarily stepped back from it spoke to a level of self-awareness that was rare among the lead operators. "But the skills remain intact," Hayes said, making it a statement rather than a question. "The skills remain intact," Elise confirmed. "Muscle memory doesn't fade, and technical knowledge stays current. I've been maintaining precision rifle systems for 3 years, which means I've stayed familiar with developments in the field." Hayes glanced around the armory, ensuring their conversation remained private. The implications of what she was learning would require careful handling, both for Elise's protection and for the unit's operational security. Having a former Shadow Division operative working in their armory was either an incredible asset or a significant complication, depending on how the situation was managed. "Ward, I need to ask you directly, are you willing and able to handle the Barrett demonstration today? Not just willing, but confident that you can showcase its capabilities in ways that will impress our visitors?" Elise considered the question from multiple angles, weighing the risks of exposure against the potential benefits of ensuring the demonstration's success. Part of her had been waiting for this moment since the day she transferred to armory duty, hoping that circumstances would eventually require her to step back into her area of expertise. Another part of her was terrified of what returning to operational use of her skills might mean for the psychological equilibrium she had worked years to achieve. "I can handle the demonstration," she said finally. "Better than anyone else currently available to you. But there will be consequences to consider afterward." Hayes nodded, understanding that they were discussing something that would require careful management beyond the immediate tactical situation. "What kind of consequences?" "My cover story becomes impossible to maintain once I demonstrate operational-level marksmanship," Elise explained. "Questions will be asked that I can't answer without revealing classified information. People will want to know how a logistics specialist acquired precision rifle skills that match special operations standards." Hayes considered this challenge, recognizing that it represented a significant complication beyond the immediate need to salvage the day's demonstration. We can manage the story afterward. Right now, I need to know if you can guarantee results that will make this unit look competent in front of people whose opinions matter. Belize looked at the Barrett M82, feeling the familiar stirring of anticipation that came with the prospect of returning to her area of true expertise. She had spent 3 years maintaining other people's weapons, ensuring they functioned properly for applications she was no longer allowed to pursue herself. The opportunity to actually use the equipment she understood so thoroughly was both terrifying and exhilarating. I can guarantee results, she said with quiet confidence. What kind of targets and ranges are we talking about? Hayes consulted her clipboard, reading from notes that had been prepared for the original demonstration plan. Multiple target types at ranges from 800 to 1500 meters. Steel targets, ballistic gelatin blocks, and a final shot on a vehicle target to demonstrate the rifle's anti-material capabilities. Shh. Elise nodded, her mind already calculating the ballistic requirements for each target type and range. 1500 meters was well within her comfort zone with the Barrett, assuming reasonable weather conditions and proper ammunition. The mix of target types would allow for a comprehensive demonstration of both precision accuracy and raw destructive power. Weather conditions? She asked, already thinking through the environmental factors that would influence bullet trajectory across those ranges. Light winds, temperature around 70 degrees, humidity moderate, Hayes replied. Conditions are nearly ideal for long-range shooting. Elise felt a familiar calm settling over her as her mind shifted into operational planning mode. The technical aspects of the demonstration were straightforward, well within her capabilities and experience level. The psychological challenges of returning to operational shooting after 3 years of abstinence were more complex, but she had always been able to compartmentalize her emotions when necessary. I'll need 30 minutes to familiarize myself with the specific ammunition being used, and to verify the scope's zero, she said, her voice taking on the professional tone that had characterized her communication during active operations. Also, I'll want to review the range layout and confirm wind conditions at each target distance. Hayes made notes on her clipboard, recognizing that she was now dealing with someone who approached marksmanship with the systematic thoroughness of a true professional. Done. Anything else you need? Elise thought through the requirements for a successful demonstration, considering not just the technical aspects, but also the psychological preparation she would need to perform at her former level after years of dash-in. Dormancy. I'll need a few minutes alone with the rifle before we begin, and I'll want to fire at least 3 confirmation rounds at a known distance to verify that everything is functioning as expected. Consider it handled, Hayes said, then paused before continuing. Ward, I have to ask, why now? Why are you willing to expose your background for this particular situation? Elise considered the question carefully, recognizing that her motivations were more complex than simple unit loyalty or professional pride. Part of her decision was driven by frustration at watching potentially inferior marksmanship represent capabilities she understood better than almost anyone alive. But part of it was also driven by a deeper need to prove to herself that her skills remained intact despite years of deliberate disuse. Because this unit deserves to be represented by the best available capability, she said finally. And because I need to know whether I can still do what I used to do. Hayes understood both motivations, recognizing the complex mixture of professional duty and personal validation that drove elite performers in high-stakes situations. Fair enough. Let's get you set up for success. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation and coordination as Hayes worked to integrate Elise into the demonstration plan without revealing more about her background than absolutely necessary. The official story would be that Ward had previously served as a designated marksman with an infantry unit, possessing specialized training that qualified her for precision rifle work. It was thin cover, but it would have to suffice for the immediate situation. Elise spent the preparation time reacquainting herself with the Barrett's specific characteristics, testing its balance and trigger pull with the methodical attention she had once applied to similar preparations before combat operations. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, its weight distribution and control layout triggering muscle memories that had remained dormant but intact throughout her armory assignment. The ammunition was match-grade .50 caliber rounds, specifically selected for long-range accuracy, each cartridge inspected and measured to ensure consistency across the demonstration. Elise examined several rounds under magnification, checking for variations in bullet weight, powder charge, and overall cartridge dimensions that might affect precision at extended ranges. The rifle's scope was a high-end variable power optic, with target turrets that allowed for precise adjustments in elevation and windage. Elise tested its tracking, and returned to 0, confirming that the scope would hold its adjustments throughout the extended firing sequence planned for the demonstration. Everything met or exceeded the standards she had demanded during her operational career. As the demonstration time approached, Elise found herself slipping back into the mental state she had cultivated during hundreds of similar situations. Her breathing slowed and deepened, her heart rate settled into the steady rhythm that would support precise shooting, and her awareness expanded to encompass environmental factors that would influence bullet trajectory across the various target ranges. The visiting dignitaries arrived in a convoy of official vehicles, their entourage including congressional representatives, defense contractors, and foreign military attachés, who were evaluating American small-buy arms capabilities. Elise observed them from a distance, noting their demeanor and apparent level of familiarity with military demonstrations. These were people accustomed to impressive displays of technological capability, which meant the Barrett demonstration would need to exceed their expectations to have meaningful impact. Martinez provided the official briefing, explaining the Barrett M82 specifications and intended applications with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed in the equipment he was showcasing. But Elise could see that the visitors were only moderately engaged, their attention divided between the technical presentation and private conversations that suggested they had seen similar demonstrations many times before. Hayes introduced her to the group as Sergeant Ward, their designated marksman for the demonstration, emphasizing her specialized training without providing details that would invite uncomfortable questions. Elise acknowledged the introduction with professional courtesy, noting the calculating looks from several visitors who were clearly evaluating her competence based on appearance and initial impression. The range layout stretched across nearly 2 miles of carefully managed terrain, with target positions marked at precise distances and orientations that would provide optimal viewing for the assembled observers. Each target was clearly visible through high-powered spotting scopes that would allow the visitors to observe bullet impact in real time, adding dramatic effect to the demonstration. Elise took her position at the firing point, settling behind the Barrett with movements that felt like returning home after a long absence. The rifle's stock fit against her shoulder with perfect familiarity, its weight distributing itself across her body in ways that supported rather than hindered her natural shooting position. She adjusted the bipod legs and confirmed her sight picture through the scope, feeling the familiar calm that came with complete technical preparation. The first target was a steel silhouette at 800 meters, positioned to provide a clear demonstration of the Barrett's accuracy at what most people would consider an extreme range for small arms fire. Elise studied the target through her scope, noting its exact position and the environmental factors that would influence her shot. A light crosswind from left to right would require minor windage adjustment, while the slight upward angle to the target position would affect bullet trajectory in predictable ways. She chambered a round with smooth precision, feeling the Barrett's bolt close with mechanical authority that spoke of perfect function. The rifle was ready, the target was clear, and the environmental conditions were ideal. Everything was in place for a shot that would either validate her decision to reveal her capabilities or expose her to questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Martinez provided commentary for the visitors, explaining the technical challenges of engaging targets at such ranges, while Elise made her final preparations. She tuned out his voice, focusing entirely on the information provided by her scope and the subtle environmental cues that would determine her shot placement. Her breathing settled into the pattern she had learned years ago, each exhale bringing her closer to the moment of perfect stillness required for precision shooting. The Barrett's trigger felt exactly as she remembered, breaking cleanly at the precise point where her muscle memory expected it. The rifle's recoil was substantial but manageable, pushing straight back into her shoulder without disturbing her sight picture. Through the spotting scopes, the observers watched as the steel target rang with metallic authority, struck dead center by a bullet that had traveled 800 meters in less than 2 seconds. The impact was visible as a bright flash of disrupted metal, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of high-velocity impact that reached them several seconds after the visual confirmation. Elise worked the Barrett's bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent case and chambering a fresh round for the next target. She was back in her element now, operating in the zone of perfect technical competence that had defined her operational career. The 3-year gap since her last precision shooting had vanished as if it had never existed. The second target was positioned at 1,200 meters, requiring more precise calculation of environmental factors and bullet trajectory. Elise made minute adjustments to her scope settings, compensating for the increased range while factoring in the slight changes in wind condition that had occurred since her first shot. The mathematics of long-range shooting were complex, but they had become second nature through years of practical application. This shot required more time for preparation, not because the technical requirements were beyond her capabilities, but because she wanted to ensure the visitors understood they were witnessing something exceptional. She let her breathing settle completely, waited for the perfect moment of stillness, and pressed the trigger with the same smooth precision that had characterized thousands of similar shots throughout her career. The impact was even more dramatic at the extended range, the bullet arriving with enough energy to completely destroy the center portion of the target while sending fragments spinning through the air in visible arcs. The sound of impact was sharper and more metallic, reflecting the increased velocity retention of the .50 caliber projectile across the longer distance. Several visitors exchanged impressed comments, their earlier polite attention shifting toward genuine engagement with what they were witnessing. This wasn't routine marksmanship, but precision shooting at a level that few people in the world could achieve consistently. Elise could hear the change in their voices, the recognition that they were observing something genuinely exceptional. The third target was a ballistic gelatin block at 1,000 meters, designed to demonstrate the Barrett's terminal ballistics against simulated human tissue. This shot required different considerations than the steel targets, as the gelatin would react to bullet impact in ways that provided visual evidence of the round's devastating effectiveness. Elise adjusted her aim point to account for the gelatin block's different target characteristics, confirming her range estimation through careful study of the target's appearance in her scope. The shot was well within her comfort zone technically, but it carried psychological weight because of what it represented. She had fired similar shots in operational contexts where the targets had been living humans rather than test media. She pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the technical requirements of the shot rather than its symbolic implications. The Barrett's trigger broke at exactly the right moment, sending another match-grade round down range with precision that reflected years of training and experience. The gelatin block exploded in spectacular fashion, creating a temporary cavity that demonstrated the massive energy transfer achieved by the .50 caliber projectile. The final target was the culmination of the demonstration, a light vehicle positioned at 1,500 meters to showcase the Barrett's anti-material capabilities. This was the shot that would either confirm her return to operational level shooting or reveal that her skills had degraded more than she realized during her 3-year absence from precision rifle work. 1,500 meters represented the outer edge of her comfort zone with the Barrett, requiring perfect technique and ideal environmental conditions to achieve consistent results. The target was clearly visible through her scope, but engaging it successfully would demand every aspect of her training and experience working in perfect coordination. She took extra time with her preparation, confirming her range estimation through multiple methods and making precise adjustments to her scope settings. The wind had shifted slightly since her previous shot, requiring compensation that could only be calculated through experience and intuitive understanding of how environmental factors affected bullet trajectory at extreme ranges. The mathematics were complex but familiar, involving calculations of bullet drop, wind drift, and the Coriolis effect that influenced projectiles traveling such distances. Elise had performed these calculations thousands of times before, and her mind processed the variables automatically while her body settled into the perfect shooting position. Her breathing pattern slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that would support the extended hold time required for this shot. She needed several seconds of perfect stillness to ensure optimal accuracy, which meant maintaining her shooting position without any muscle tension that might disturb her aim point. The Barrett's trigger broke with clean precision, sending the final round of the demonstration toward a target that represented the maximum effective range of both the weapon system and her personal capabilities. The boat's flight time was long enough to be perceptible, creating a moment of suspended anticipation before the impact occurred. The vehicle target erupted in dramatic fashion as the .50 caliber projectile struck its engine block with devastating effect. Metal fragments flew in all directions, fluid sprayed from ruptured systems, and the entire front end of the vehicle lifted slightly from the force of impact. It was a demonstration of destructive capability that exceeded anything the visitors had expected to witness. Elise safed the Barrett and began her post-firing procedures, checking the weapon's condition and preparing it for transport back to the armory. But her attention was focused on the reactions of the visiting dignitaries, who were discussing what they had witnessed with animated enthusiasm that suggested genuine impression with the demonstration's effectiveness. Hayes approached her position with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal amazement. "Ward, that was exceptional shooting. I've seen a lot of marksmanship demonstrations over the years, but nothing that approached that level of precision and consistency." Elise nodded acknowledgement while continuing her equipment checks, maintaining the professional demeanor that had characterized her throughout the demonstration. "The Barrett performed exactly as expected, Sergeant. The maintenance work paid off in terms of mechanical accuracy." Hayes understood that Elise was deflecting attention from her personal performance toward the equipment's condition, but the deflection couldn't disguise what everyone had witnessed. This hadn't been competent marksmanship, but shooting in a level that suggested extensive experience with precision rifle systems under operational conditions. Martinez joined them at the firing point, his expression showing obvious relief, but the demonstration had exceeded all expectations. "Outstanding work, Ward. The visitors are asking questions about our training programs and equipment maintenance procedures. They want to know how we achieve such consistent accuracy." Elise felt a familiar tightness in her chest as she recognized the beginning of the scrutiny she had been trying to avoid for 3 years. Questions about training programs and procedures would eventually lead to questions about individual qualifications and experience, topics that would require explanations she wasn't prepared to provide. "Standard military marksmanship training, Sergeant," she replied carefully, "combined with proper equipment maintenance and favorable environmental conditions." But even as she spoke, Elise knew that her explanation wouldn't satisfy the level of curiosity her performance had generated. The visitors included people who understood precision shooting well enough to recognize exceptional skill when they witnessed it. They would want more detailed information about how such capabilities were developed and maintained within the unit. One of the congressional representatives approached their group, accompanied by a defense contractor whose questions suggested genuine technical knowledge about precision rifle systems. "Sergeant Ward, that was impressive shooting. How long have you been working with the Barrett platform?" The question was exactly what Elise had been dreading, a direct inquiry about her background that would require either deception or revelation of information that was supposed to remain classified. She looked at Hayes, hoping for guidance about how to handle the situation without compromising operational security. "Sergeant Ward has extensive experience with precision rifle systems," Hayes interjected, providing cover without specific details. "Her technical knowledge and practical skills make her one of our most valuable assets for this type of demonstration." The congressman nodded, but his follow-up questions made it clear that he wasn't satisfied with general explanations. "What's your background, Sergeant? Did you serve as a designated marksman with an infantry unit?" Elise felt the weight of multiple competing interests pressing down on her as she considered her response. She could maintain her cover story and hope that casual curiosity wouldn't develop into detailed investigation. Or she could acknowledge enough of her background to satisfy immediate questions while hoping to avoid deeper scrutiny that might expose classified operations. "I've had specialized training in precision rifle systems, sir," she said carefully. "Multiple platforms and applications developed over several years of focused study." The answer was technically accurate, while avoiding specific details about when, where, or under what circumstances she had received such training. But Elise could see that it wouldn't satisfy the level of interest her demonstration had generated. These people understood enough about military training to recognize that her performance suggested experience that went far beyond standard programs. The defense contractor leaned forward, his expression showing the kind of professional interest that suggested he understood exactly what he had witnessed. "Sergeant, shooting like that requires more than just training. It requires extensive practical experience under field conditions. Have you deployed with units that made regular use of precision rifle capabilities? The question was precisely what Elise had been hoping to avoid. A direct inquiry about operational experience that she couldn't answer honestly without revealing classified information. She looked around at the assembled group, noting that their conversation was attracting attention from other visitors who had been impressed by the demonstration. Hayes stepped in again, recognizing that the situation was developing beyond what could be managed through casual deflection. Gentlemen, Sergeant Ward's specific operational history involves sensitive information that we can't discuss in this forum. What I can tell you is that her capabilities represent exactly the kind of precision shooting skills that make American small arms systems effective in the hands of properly trained personnel." End quote. The congressman accepted this explanation with apparent understanding, recognizing that they were approaching areas that might involve classified operations or sensitive personnel information. But the defense contractor continued to study Elise with the calculating attention of someone who suspected there was much more to her story than was being revealed. As the visitors concluded their inspection and began preparations for departure, Elise found herself reflecting on what she had accomplished and what it might mean for her carefully constructed anonymity. She had successfully demonstrated the Barrett's capabilities in ways that impressed knowledgeable observers, but she had also revealed personal capabilities that would invite continued scrutiny. Hayes waited until the visitors had departed before approaching Elise for a private conversation about the day's events and their implications. "Ward, we need to discuss how to handle the attention your performance is going to generate. Questions will be asked that go beyond what we can answer with standard explanations." Elise nodded, recognizing that her decision to reveal her capabilities had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate demonstration. "I understand, Sergeant. My cover story was never going to survive that level of scrutiny indefinitely." Hayes studied her with the kind of attention that suggested she was still processing everything she had learned about her subordinate's background. "Ward, I need you to be completely honest with me about your situation. Are there aspects of your service record that could create complications if they receive official attention?" Elise considered the question carefully, weighing the risks of full disclosure against the dangers of continued concealment. Hayes had proven herself trustworthy, and the situation had developed to a point where partial honesty might be more dangerous than complete revelation. "My service record includes operations that remain classified at levels that require special handling," she said finally. "The kind of attention that today's demonstration might generate could lead to questions that I'm not authorized to answer, regardless of who's asking them." Hayes understood immediately that they were discussing something that extended far beyond normal military bureaucracy. Shadow Division operations? Elise nodded once, confirming what Hayes had already suspected based on the metal and the level of marksmanship she had witnessed. 3 years ago, I requested transfer out of active operations for personal reasons. The armory assignment was supposed to provide cover that would allow me to continue serving without exposure to situations that might compromise ongoing operations or personnel. Hayes absorbed this information, recognizing that she was now dealing with complications that required careful handling at levels far above her own authority. "Ward, I think we need to involve people with higher security clearances and better understanding of how to manage these situations." Elise felt a familiar weight settling in her chest as she realized that her 3 years of anonymity were definitively over. The demonstration had been successful beyond any reasonable expectation, but that success had cost her the comfortable invisibility she had worked so hard to maintain. "I understand, Sergeant," she said quietly. "I knew this was a possibility when I agreed to handle the demonstration. Some capabilities are too distinctive to hide indefinitely." As they walked back toward the armory building, Elise found herself thinking about the strange turns her life had taken and what the future might hold. She had spent 3 years trying to become someone different, but today had proven that some aspects of identity were too fundamental to simply discard. Her mettle, her skills, and her experience remained part of who she was, regardless of how she chose to apply them. The Barrett M82 case felt familiar in her hands as she carried it back to the armory, its weight reminding her of similar weapons she had carried across continents and through operations that would never appear in official records. Today had been the first time in 3 years that she had used such equipment for its intended purpose, and the experience had awakened feelings she had been trying to suppress. Part of her was terrified of what renewed attention to her background might mean for the peaceful existence she had built in the armory. But another part of her felt a sense of relief, that she no longer had to pretend to be less capable than she actually was, that her true skills had been acknowledged by people who understood their significance. The medal in her cleaning kit represented more than just past achievements. It was a reminder that some responsibilities transcended personal preferences and career choices. She had developed capabilities that few people in the world possessed, and those capabilities carried obligations that didn't simply disappear because she wanted to live a different kind of life. As evening settled over the base, Elise completed her post-demonstration paperwork and began the process of securing the Barrett for its return to normal storage. But she knew that nothing would be normal about her situation from this point forward. Today had changed everything, revealing truths that had been hidden for 3 years, and setting in motion consequences that she couldn't predict or control. The quiet armory technician who had reported for work that morning no longer existed. In her place was someone whose capabilities had been recognized, and whose background would now receive scrutiny that might reshape her entire future. It was a transformation she had been both dreading and anticipating since the day she first walked into the armory basement, and now it was finally beginning. Her medal lay in its case, no longer a secret burden, but an acknowledgement of skills that remained as sharp as the day they had been earned. 305 confirmed eliminations represented a level of expertise that the world still needed, even if she had been trying to walk away from its demands. Today had proven that walking away might not be as simple as she had hoped, and that some talents were too valuable to waste on routine maintenance tasks. The Barrett M82 sat cleaned and ready in its case, a testament to both mechanical precision and human skill. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions, but tonight, Elise felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The satisfaction of having applied her capabilities at the highest level and achieved results that exceeded every reasonable expectation. She was still the same person who had walked into the armory that morning, but she was no longer pretending to be anyone else. The demonstration had stripped away her carefully maintained anonymity and revealed the truth about who she really was. Now, she would have to decide what to do with that truth, and how to move forward in a world that had been reminded of exactly what she was capable of achieving.